Marcy was the kind of person who gave more than she had. Marcy had been pouring coffee and comfort in the same small-town diner for almost 12 years. She wasn't the loudest or the quickest, but if someone needed an extra napkin or a kind word, she noticed. People passed through that place like clouds, always moving, some in a hurry, some just drifting, none staying long enough to leave more than a name on a receipt. But Marcy was constant, reliable, the kind of presence that didn't need a spotlight to matter. Even on days her ankles ached and her back throbbed from carrying trays and worries alike, she still tied on her apron and showed up. The tips barely covered gas. The air conditioning was moody in summer, the heat worse in winter. But Marcy didn't come for comfort or applause. She came because people needed coffee, warmth, and sometimes someone who would remember their name. Not for glory, just because that's what you did. She wore an old wristwatch that belonged to her brother. It was scratched and a little loose on her wrist, but she never replaced the band. He died too young. The kind of young that leaves too many birthdays behind and not enough photographs. She never really talked about it, not because she didn't want to, but because it ached too much to explain to people who hadn't loved him like she did. Every day at 3:17, like clockwork, her hand would drift to the watch face. His birthday. A quiet ritual no one saw. Sometimes, if she wasn't busy, she'd close her eyes for a second and imagine his laugh, or the way he used to call her Mars, like the planet. It grounded her somehow, reminding her that love doesn't disappear. It just finds quieter ways to stay. Outside of work, she cared for her aging father, who'd started confusing names and leaving the stove on. Some days, he was sharp as ever, humming old jazz tunes as he folded the laundry. Other days, he called her by her mother's name and stared at the television like it was speaking another language. Marcy learned to gently correct, gently remind, gently clean up the spills he didn't notice. Her apartment was small, cluttered with memories she couldn't afford to let go of. There were picture frames on every surface, some holding family photos, others pressed with old dried flowers. A sketchbook lived on the counter, always within reach but rarely opened. A framed drawing her brother made in high school hung crookedly on the hallway wall, and she never bothered to straighten it. It felt more honest that way. The grocery list, always stuck to the fridge, seemed to grow longer than her paycheck could stretch. But she made it work. Somehow, she never complained. But even good hearts have limits. Then one night, just before close, a stranger walked in. It was a Tuesday, cold enough to see your breath. The last hour before close, when most customers were home or half asleep. The bell over the diner door jingled, and in walked a boy, maybe 20, thin, pale, and weather-worn. His hoodie was too light for the weather, sleeves stretched out, fraying at the cuffs. His shoes were mismatched, one too big, the other splitting at the sole. He looked like someone who hadn't had a stable place to sleep in a while. Maybe not fully homeless, but close. One of those in-between kids. No coat, no bag. Just whatever he could carry in his pockets, and the weight he carried in his eyes. He shuffled to the counter, eyes scanning the menu like he could will the prices lower. Finally, he pointed to the cheapest thing, a bowl of soup. He pulled out a handful of change, counted, came up short. The manager noticed, frowned. "If he can't pay," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "he can't stay." Marcy froze. Something about the boy, the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands shook, reminded her of someone. Her brother, maybe, or what he might have looked like had he made it a few years longer. She looked down at her notepad. Her pen hovered just above the page, though she wasn't writing anything. The silence between them felt heavy. She could feel the eyes of the manager, the tension in the air, but what she really noticed was the boy's hands, how they trembled slightly as he tried to slide his coins back into his pocket without shame. Then she looked up at him, really looked. His face was tired in a way that had nothing to do with age, and for just a second, her heart broke open. "I got it," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady, certain. She paid for the meal out of her tips. It wasn't much, just a few dollars from a nearly empty jar, but it was enough. She didn't want thanks. She didn't need a story. She just didn't want to see him turned out into the cold with nothing in his stomach. The boy didn't speak much. He kept his head down, focused on the bowl like it was the most important thing he'd seen all week. He didn't rush. He didn't ask for more, just ate slowly, carefully, like each spoonful of soup was trying to undo 2 days of hunger. Maybe more. Every now and then, he'd glance around, like he couldn't quite believe no one was kicking him out, like some part of him was still braced for rejection. When he finally finished, he set the spoon down gently, as if not to disturb the peace that had briefly settled over him. He looked up at her with eyes that were clearer now, less guarded. "I'll pay you back someday," he said quietly. She smiled, not because she expected anything in return, but because the fact that he said it meant he still had hope. "Just pay it forward, all right?" A life full of weight behind the scenes. That night, Marcy went home to her apartment, where the heater rattled and her dad mistook her for his sister. She helped him take his meds, cleaned up the tea he'd spilled, and kissed his forehead before bed. She sat in the kitchen a while, flipping through her old sketchbook. The pages were curled at the edges, smudged with graphite and dreams. Half-finished drawings stared back at her. Faces she used to know, places she'd once imagined. Notes from a younger version of herself who believed art would be her life. That she'd live in a studio apartment in the city, maybe even have her name on a book cover. Life had other plans. Upstairs, a neighbor played piano. Something soft, something sad. The notes drifted down through the walls like echoes of a different life. Marcy closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, just for a minute. It was the only kind of silence she trusted, the kind filled with memory, not absence. Kindness doesn't always echo right away, but it echoes. The boy never came back. Marcy sometimes wondered what happened to him, but mostly, she forgot. Life moved on. She kept waiting tables, kept caring for her dad, kept letting her dreams sit on shelves, untouched, but not unloved. She never told anyone about the soup, because to her, it wasn't a story. It wasn't some grand gesture or selfless act meant to be remembered. It was just what you do. When someone's cold and hungry, you help. When you can make the world softer for someone else, even for a moment, you do it. No spotlight, no expectation, just quiet decency. The kind that never makes headlines, but keeps the world turning. But karma has a memory. It stores things away like sunlight in winter, quietly, patiently, as if the universe has its own ledger where nothing truly good goes unnoticed. And one day, when Marcy would find herself in the kind of trouble even kindness couldn't seem to fix, when the weight of life would press in from all sides and hope felt like it had packed up and left, that unpaid debt would finally come back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the most unexpected way, and it would change everything. The changes started small, until everything began to unravel. The diner changed hands in March. New management, new rules, new faces behind the counter who didn't know the regulars by name and didn't care to learn. Marcy was asked to train the younger staff, but no one really listened. They were faster, yes, but colder too. Everything was about efficiency. Tips went down, hours got cut, smiles became optional. Then came the staff meeting where they restructured. That was the word they used. "We're moving in a more modern direction," the manager had said. "We appreciate your loyalty, but your position is no longer required." Just like that, Marcy's 12 years of showing up didn't count anymore. All the holidays she covered, the double shifts she never turned down, the quiet way she remembered how every regular took their coffee, none of it mattered now, not to them. She boxed up her apron and name tag with hands that had folded thousands of napkins and steadied countless trays. No severance, no farewell card, just a final paycheck and a thank you that felt rehearsed and hollow, as if she were being erased, not released. She tried to stay calm, but life had a way of piling things on all at once. Rent was due in 12 days. Her dad's medications had changed again. New prescriptions, higher costs. Insurance didn't cover everything, and she had no idea how to make the math work. She started skipping meals without telling anyone, poured extra water into the soup, made 1 cup of coffee stretch for 2 mornings. By the end of the week, even routine errands felt like small mountains. The grocery store had become a place of quiet anxiety, mentally calculating what she could afford, hoping nothing rang up wrong. But the real test came at the pharmacy. She had picked up her dad's new prescriptions, double-checked the bottles, and stood in line rehearsing how she might ask to hold off on part of the order if it came to that. At the counter, she slid her card across and looked down, pretending not to notice the total. The machine blinked, then stalled. A pause. Then declined. The tech looked embarrassed, then impatient. "I just need a day," Marcy said softly. He offered a tight smile. "I'm sorry. I can't process the order until it clears." She walked out, meds unpaid for, heart heavy. The automatic doors opened like they always did, but this time it felt like she was being pushed back into a world that was colder than when she entered. Her footsteps on the sidewalk felt heavier than usual, as if failure clung to her soles. She hated that money had become the gatekeeper between her and her father's well-being. She hated that she'd let it get this far, that even when she'd done everything right, worked hard, stayed kind, it still wasn't enough. In the parking lot, she sat in the car and let the silence fill her. She didn't reach for the radio. She didn't check her phone. She just stared through the windshield, the weight of it all pressing against her chest like a stone. Then came the tears, quiet, hot, and exhausted. The kind that don't fix anything, but demand to be felt. They slipped down her cheeks in silence, not dramatic, just honest. A release she hadn't given herself in weeks. A woman passing by noticed and tapped gently on her window. "You okay, hun?" she asked. Marcy wiped her eyes and nodded. "Just tired." The woman paused, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded $10 bill. "No one gets through this life alone," she said. She placed the bill in Marcy's hand, a soft, wordless offering of grace. Her eyes were kind but firm, as if she'd done this before. No lecture, no explanation, just a simple gesture from one weary soul to another. Then she turned and walked away without waiting for thanks, as if kindness was its own quiet reward. Marcy took whatever work she could find, but it wasn't enough. She landed a late-night cleaning gig at a downtown law office, 3 nights a week, minimum wage. It was quiet, lonely work, vacuuming, wiping fingerprints, emptying trash. One night, after finishing up her shift feeling particularly invisible, she stood alone in the break room with a sticky note and a pen. The office was so polished, so silent, and yet she sensed the weariness in the air. Maybe it reminded her of herself, going through the motions, waiting for something to change. On a whim, she left a sticky note on the break room fridge. She doodled a cheerful little son wearing sunglasses and the words, "You made it through Monday. That's something." She didn't sign it, didn't think much of it, but when she returned the next week, something was different. As she passed the break room, she noticed a small crowd gathered near the bulletin board, talking softly, smiling. And right there, pinned in the center, was her sticky note. Someone had saved it, reposted it with care, and added a handwritten message beneath. "Whoever drew this, thank you. We needed that." She started leaving one every shift. Simple drawings, kind words, encouragements. Some were light-hearted, tiny animals with party hats, silly puns about coffee. Others were quietly sincere, but each one offered something she herself needed. A reason to smile, a reminder that someone noticed. It became her little secret, a way to give hope without anyone seeing her. The office staff started calling the mystery artist the Night Doodler. Notes appeared on desks. Someone left a sticky note that said, "You have no idea how much this helped me today." No one knew it was the woman mopping their floors at 2 a.m. It didn't pay more, but it made her feel seen again, even if no one knew her name. But just when it felt like maybe things might hold together, the bottom dropped out. She was 10 days behind on rent. The kind of behind where she stopped opening mail and avoided eye contact with her landlord in the hallway, where every knock at the door made her flinch just slightly, unsure if it would be the final notice or a neighbor asking for something she couldn't give. Her landlord finally posted the notice on her door. Final warning, 3 days. She peeled it off and stuffed it into a drawer before her dad could see it. She called every charity on the list taped to her fridge, names she had scribbled down months ago but prayed she'd never need. She left voicemails that grew shakier with each call, her voice more fragile than she realized. She filled out online forms after midnight with half-closed eyes and a sinking heart. She waited on hold through static music and endless recorded messages that said they understood, though clearly they didn't. And when someone finally picked up, the voice on the other end simply said, "We're out of emergency funds for the month." At night, her dad slept soundly, his breathing soft and steady, unaware of the storm pressing in around them. But Marcy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced through numbers, scenarios, what-ifs, trying to plan, trying to hope, trying to believe that somehow, some way, a door would open before everything collapsed. She opened her sketchbook and drew a tiny lighthouse in the corner of the page, then wrote beside it, "Still standing." That's when something unexpected arrived. There was a letter waiting in the mailbox. It had no return address. The postmark was from out of state, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. Simple, all caps, and careful, like someone who wanted to be sure every word was understood. Inside, a note, handwritten in blocky, familiar handwriting, and a check for $5,000. The note read, "You once gave a stranger a meal without asking anything in return. I never forgot. I have a job now. A life. You were my turning point. Let me be yours. Z." Marcy sat on the couch in stunned silence. The check trembled in her hands, her fingers tracing the numbers as if they might vanish if she blinked too long. Her eyes welled with disbelief, and something deeper. Relief, maybe. Or grace. She hadn't thought about him in ages. The soup. The quiet boy with tired eyes. The one she fed without asking questions. She had nearly forgotten his face, but the feeling of that night, the warmth she offered and the ache behind his thank you, remained tucked away in her memory. But he had remembered. She pressed her hand to her heart, then gently to her brother's watch. The gesture was instinctive now, but today it carried new weight. Not all debts are forgotten, and not all kindnesses vanish into the void. Sometimes they find their way back, not in grand gestures or perfect timing, but in handwritten notes and unexpected envelopes. In moments when you think no one saw you, no one remembered. Just when you need them most, they return, not only to lift the weight, but to remind you that the seeds you sowed in love were never lost. The check changed her circumstances, but the note changed her heart. Marcy sat with the letter for a long time before doing anything, not because she didn't believe it, but because something inside her needed to feel it, to absorb it, the weight of it, the grace of it. It wasn't just a check. It was a hand reaching across time, across pain, across everything she had kept quietly buried. The apartment was quiet. The only sound was the gentle tick of her brother's watch on her wrist. She read the note again, and again. You once gave a stranger a meal without asking anything in return. She remembered his face now, clear as day. The look in his eyes, the desperation, the hope, and the way he whispered, "I'll pay you back someday." She had never expected him to mean it. She pressed her fingers to the check one last time, folded it carefully, and laid it on the kitchen table beside her sketchbook. Then she wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and got to work. She used the money for exactly what mattered. Rent, her dad's medication, a few groceries, including ingredients for her favorite soup, the one she made the night she fed that boy. She bought herself a new sketchbook, not because she needed it, but because it reminded her that her dreams weren't dead, just dormant, waiting. She left a sticky note in her old diner locker before turning in her keys. It read, "Kindness never goes out of style." She signed it simply, M. Then the ripple began. A few weeks later, the librarian at the local branch asked if she'd consider teaching a free drawing class. "Just for the kids," she said. "You have a gift." She had seen the sticky notes Marcy left behind on the community bulletin board. Tiny sketches paired with kind words, just like the ones she had once left in the law office. One had said, "Even cloudy days end in light." Another featured a child's drawing next to Marcy's smiling cartoon bear. The librarian had quietly saved each one. Marcy agreed, nervously at first. She hadn't been in front of a group in years, and the thought of being watched made her palms sweat. But something shifted as she knelt beside a child sketching a purple dinosaur, or watched another beam with pride over a rocket that barely fit on the page. As she helped those little hands bring monsters and rocket ships to life with markers and chalk, she felt a quiet stirring inside her, like a forgotten part of herself had just sat up and smiled. Their joy rekindled something in her, something she hadn't even realized she'd lost. Parents noticed. So did the community center. A young mother in the back of the room one day asked, "Are you the same Marcy from the article?" Marcy blinked, caught completely off guard. No one had ever connected her name to anything before, at least, not like this. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and gave a puzzled laugh. "What article?" The young mother smiled and pulled out her phone. "It was on our neighborhood Facebook group last week. Someone shared this beautiful story about a waitress who once paid for a stranger's meal. Then years later, he sent her a check that helped save her home. They called you the Night Doodler. It said you'd started leaving drawings and encouragements at your cleaning job. It went viral." That night she found it online. The waitress who paid it forward and got it back when it mattered most. What she didn't know, until much later, was that her father, in a rare and lucid moment, had found the letter and check she left on the kitchen table that day. Moved by what he read, he had taken a photo of the note and posted it to social media with a caption that simply read, "My daughter helped someone, and they remembered." The post quietly made its way around the community, eventually catching the attention of someone at the law office. Someone there shared her doodles and the story behind them, including how one small act of kindness had once led to an anonymous $5,000 check that helped her stay afloat. They posted about how she used to leave drawings on sticky notes during her janitorial shifts, and how none of them knew who she was, until someone recognized her story, and somehow it had traveled. The story of the Night Doodler was inspiring people across the city. Even the past caught wind of it. Her old manager from the diner left a comment on the article. She was always a hard worker, one of the best. But the likes on that comment were few. The truth had already spoken louder. Not with arguments or comments, but with the quiet strength of a community that had already seen her heart. People knew who she was now. Not because she demanded recognition, but because her story had moved through them like light through a window. Authentic, undeniable. Meanwhile, Marcy received another anonymous donation a week later. $250 with a card that simply said, "Because you made the world warmer." She didn't know if it was from the same young man or someone else who had read her story, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that it was still rippling. She started something she never saw coming. The community art class turned into a monthly workshop, then a mural project. The library invited her to speak at a small community event called Hope in Hard Places. She stood at the podium with shaking hands, unsure what to say. So she just told the truth. I gave someone a meal once. It didn't cost much, but it came from a full heart on an empty day. I never expected anything back. But that one act, it kept going. Like a light passed forward. And now it's reached me again, just when I needed it most. So if you ever wonder if your small kindness matters, it does. Even if no one thanks you. Even if no one sees. Because kindness leaves a mark, even in silence. Keep giving. Even when no one's watching. Especially then. Because that's when it echoes the loudest. The crowd stood. Clapped. Not loud. Just long. It wasn't the kind of applause reserved for celebrities or polished speeches. It was slower, steadier, full of heart. The kind of applause that comes from being moved, not impressed. People wiped their eyes. Some nodded to each other in silence. In that moment, Marcy wasn't just a speaker. She was a mirror of what goodness looks like when it's quietly lived. She never did hear from Z again. Not directly. But sometimes when she walked downtown, she'd spot a man about the right age dropping off groceries at the shelter or placing a folded bill into a street musician's case. He never looked her way, never lingered long, but there was something familiar in the quiet way he moved, the way he kept his head down and his actions simple. It was enough to make her wonder. Not with certainty, but with that quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, he was still out there, paying it forward in his own quiet way. She never chased him down. She didn't need to. She had proof in her own life that kindness, true kindness, doesn't disappear. It plants something, a seed so small it often goes unnoticed, but deep in the soil of someone's heart, it waits. Quiet, steady, faithful. And in time, it grows. Not always quickly, not always where you expect, but always when it's most needed. Karma doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, through a note left behind, a door held open, a meal covered without a name. Sometimes it takes years, moving through hands and hearts, changing lives quietly until it circles back again. But it never loses track of love, because love, when given freely, always knows the way home. And on the quietest days, when you wonder if you were foolish to be kind, it shows up. Not to pay you back, but to remind you that you mattered.